impressed.
Oh.
Yes. Well, I missed the last lead up to the elections, and I tell you, I reckon that was worth missing.
Yes, you're not wrong there. Labor silly party, and all those great greenies who voted for them, some close friends of ours, and then they went and did the dirty on us. Bob Smartass Hawke. Well, good news, listeners. Crack the champagne bottles. I tell you what, mate. Oh, it's not often you get a Parrot score, but I tell you what, we can claim a bit of part credit, because you remember that development in St Kilda we've been bitching about for ages? Well, after the council elections on Saturday, it's over. We're going out to listeners at the moment, Roger?
Yes, we are.
We are indeed, all right. It's over.
It's amazing.
Cannon's knocked it back. It's the end of it. The council's totally reformed. All those pro-developers have gone where they don't play billiards, waiting for another council election. And those penguins down there are secure, as safe as houses. So are the water rats. So is the seagrass. So is the bloody lot. Unreal.
So what were the grounds? Do we know yet officially, or is it...
Well, it was that after the council elections, all the progressive candidates were all got in, and they got in such a way as they're going to be there for a couple of years. And the whole result of the thing has meant that... I just unplugged myself. Anyway, the whole result of the thing has meant that there will be progressive candidates in there for another, or at least one more term. So it's 2 years of security about development. And no high-rise development either.
Terrific.
The new council seems pretty well stacked for numbers, and Jim Kennan has knocked back the approval for the marina development on the grounds that there was obviously not enough community support. So that is what you call music to your ears. So righto, you buggers out there. If you haven't subscribed to RRR, you don't want to subscribe to RRR, now's the time to reform. Because I tell you what, this is the time to subscribe.
Well, I must admit I voted in my ward on Saturday, and I was very disappointed with the outcome. But it just happened that the quarter of the Brunswick that I was in, we didn't get the right candidate in, but we did in the other 3 quarters. So hopefully there might even be a little bit of environmentalism in Brunswick in the future. Goodness me, folks.
That's right,
that be
and
amazing?
also too, people just completely underestimate the power of local council. And look at St Kilda, like that was the council was the one that brought up that megalomaniac scheme for the development down there, and Nellie pushed it through. It was the people that bloody well changed it. And look, the best news I've had for 12 months. Unbelievable, unreal. We've been working on this friggin' thing since June last year. Since we smelt that penguin dung at the bottom of the harbour.
Well, actually, it was there was a woman who was doing a show on Thursday lunchtimes who rang us up in the first place with concern about the marina.
That's right, yeah, from Chatton
Belinda.
Yeah, Belinda. She was an old mate from Tasmanian environmental design course when I was a wayward effort at my tertiary education that lasted all of 6 months. And no, that was spot on. So you can go out there and get blind tonight because you can celebrate that one. If you've been worried about St Kilda penguins and that, this is your time to crack a bot and go and serve all your vices. I've been doing it. Bloody spot on. Get into it. And subscribe, you buggers. Subscribe, because obviously it works. And it's not often that public radio gets out on the street. And even when it gets out in the street, it's not very often you actually get a result. And we've certainly got a result. And it's, look, I tell you what, it's just shit hot. That's the only expression that could possibly cover it. Just bloody brilliant. Anyway.
What have we got on tonight?
Bits and pieces. The flounder story coming up later, around about 6:30. And that's, you might have heard, if people have been listening with any degree of continuity, that Conservation Forests and Lands, after declaring an area in Corner Inlet and Nooramunga, which is the area to the east of Corner Inlet, above Wilson's Promontory, and including Wilson's Promontory and Marine National Park, then went through, in their only management change that they've made to the area virtually, opened up the eastern section to flounder spearing on the basis of contradictory advice in regard to fish returns. And, oh yes, good evening Gippsland listeners too. And it looked very much like this is going to continue, and we've tackled it, I suppose, in probably the first on air, I suppose. We put a little bit of pressure on as far as getting them to realise that lots of people didn't feel that it was appropriate. And now we've proposed a study, and it appears that even is not satisfactory. Even bipartisan support of a study combining fishermen, wildlife researchers and Conservation Forests and Lands didn't come off. So we're going to talk to Ken King from the Yarram region and find out just why. And we'll be talking to Merri Creek, who's a Port Franklin fishermen and finding out what they think of the situation. And also, for those of you who haven't heard the background on it, Merri Creek will go into the background a bit more and explain flounder fishing and flounder spearing to you, so you understand what's happening. So, and the first part of the show, and we've also got Sue Chaney on air. Good evening, Sue.
Good evening.
And Sue, you've been principally organising our trip up north. We've just started with cooperation of the station to organise another season of trips away. And we were trying to think of the most idyllic spot, the most idyllic trip that any of the listeners could have. And we've come up with 4 tropical islands in the bunker group. And Sue, would you just like to give us a bit of information about that tour?
Well, the trips start in late October, from the 17th of October, and there'll be 8-day trips. And we're going up to, as you said, some tropical islands, and there's just nothing out there except nothing like cars and things like that. It's just natural vegetation, doing natural history trips around the islands.
Yeah, it's going to be spot on. There's 4 islands. There's Masthead, Tryon, Lady Musgrave and Northwest Island. And you didn't remember them, did you? And they're all typical coral islands. They're principally covered in a scrub called Pisonia, which is a particular type of tree that inhabits those islands out there. And things like noddy terns nesting, crested terns, loggerhead turtles nesting on the beach, and leatherback turtles. We should run into the first of the turtles nesting. Stacks of wildlife out there. Pristine coral reef. It's in the World Heritage Area. They're all surrounded by coral atolls. They're about between 4 and 7.5 hours offshore, so they're quite a long way away from anyone. There's no commercial shipping allowed within many miles of the islands, and they should be absolutely ideal. And what about how are we getting there, and that, Sue? How does it work out like that?
Well, we're flying up there, straight up to Rockhampton, then we go down to Gladstone and catch barges out. It should be a nice trip out. It's about a 5-hour trip across the islands.
Right, and how long was this all in the one day, the first day?
The first day, yeah. First day's, like it's 8 days. You fly out from Melbourne on the first day, and by that afternoon you'll be sitting on a tropical island just miles away from everything.
Unbelievable. And what do we require people to bring on these trips?
Not much at all. They'll have to bring a bit of dry food up with them, and fresh foods and stuff like that we can buy on the way out to the island. Mm-hmm. Fresh tropical foods, and there's not much else you'll need out there.
Right, we can catch plenty of fish.
Yeah.
And you'll need a tent, of course, at some stage or another, though you don't get very much rain out there. And a sleeping sheet or sleeping bag. Probably sleeping bag would be too warm. And a little stable cooker. And we'll take some firewood out. The islands are pristine, so you've got to be really careful. And we won't be damaging them one iota. We go out and tread very gently. All we'll leave behind is our footsteps. And it should be an absolute mind-blowing trip. 7-8 days, a tropical island, get beyond that, and you're getting into Robinson Crusoe country, so it's a real good start. It's a brilliant introduction to that area. And get your mother, get your grandma, get fired up. Go and see those friends. You need a trip away. You should go away. You should head north. And you can give us a call after the show, and on 419-2066 and tell us if you want to go north, and we'll send you a brochure. You'll hear promos on the station for it. The whole lot upright cost is around about...
Well, for subscribers it's 875, and for non-subscribers 920. So if you subscribe now, you'd make a bit of a saving.
You certainly would. So there's another good reason to subscribe. Not only do we get you results and get into the planning thing, but we also run really good trips away. And after the success of Cape Tribulation last year, I think this will just be absolutely Monty. I'm certainly looking forward to it. Swatting very hard on tropical islands at the present time, on coral reef communities. We'll have the field guides. You'll be able to meet national parks naturalists before you take off, and out there. They'll be visiting us on the islands. It's in the humpback whale migratory route. Look, what more could you ask for? It is absolutely superb. So after the show, give us a call on 419-2066 if you're interested in that trip. And it really should be the chance of a lifetime. I don't think of any other way I'd be able to get myself out there. And the price, okay, if you wanted to do it yourself, it'd probably cost you about $1,400. So we're getting the concessions all the way along the line, and so that's why we do the trips from RRR. We don't put a big margin on them, and we work out all the concession airfares. So it should work out really well for you. Roger, you've been away for a while. You must have seen something interesting.
Oh, I have seen a few interesting... I haven't made it out into the bush so much, which is a bit disappointing, but speaking of the news, actually, on the show, have you dealt with that thing about those beacons that they're using for the bicentenary? Have you talked about that at all? I just saw something in the paper a week or two back where they said they were using a huge tonnage of wood to light these beacons, which are supposed to reach, and you're supposed to be able to see the beacon from about 30 kilometres away. I think they were using about 10 tonnes of wood each or something like that. And they did a test down on the coast a couple of weeks ago, and I saw this photo in the paper. It looked like brush, you know, things like tea tree and stuff like that. They're going to put a ring of them around the state. I was just wondering whether they were actually going to go out, cut down weedy species, or whether they're just going to rip into the closest bit of dried vegetation, bung it in a pile, and put it on the coast, put a couple of matches to it, and go whoopee-doo.
Sounds like the 150th arch all over again, doesn't it? That horror they built in Flinders Street. What time of the year is it? Excuse my ignorance and lack of patriotism.
What time of the year is it? What, now?
No, when they're going to burn the beacons.
I couldn't tell you.
Now.
I couldn't tell you. Sometime next year.
Sometime next year, because I'll tell you what, if they burn the beacons in the summertime, you could attract quite a few of the seabirds into them, because that's one of the hassles with bright lights down at Tidal River at the prom. They've got really bright lights down there in the car park, and fairy prions and mutton birds and things like that are attracted into those areas. And it's a real pity to see a fairy prion break its neck hitting a light unnecessarily, and it'd be a real pity to scorch them up in celebration of our 200th. I don't know, I'm not real keen on that.
Well, there are a couple of good things happening. What I've sort of been doing for the last 4 or 5 weeks is mainly concentrating on the nursery, which we're growing local native plants in and around Melbourne. And there's a few pretty good bicentennial projects going along in plantings and revegetation around the place. One of the notable ones is down on the Merri Creek in Northcote, Sumner Park, which is one of the areas that there was a bit of water going down the creek last week. Last week.
Had
it
a
was
good flush,
too.
didn't she? Yeah.
Yes. A few trees we'd planted a couple of months ago got drenched, but luckily they didn't get washed out. But there's some good wetland revegetation going down there, lots of stuff. They've put a bend back into the creek that the MMBW took out years ago, and there's some 15,000 plants going in there this spring. A whole range of things that used to grow along the creek, some of which don't grow along the creek, some of which we had to get seed from the Yarra, lots of different places. And that's going to be one project that'll be interesting to look at. A few of the other things we've been doing is on one area trying to get rid of weed species, things like roses and gauze in an area of native grassland that was burned up on the Merri Creek there, and going into that, getting some selective herbicides. Of course, it'd take you about a year to do it by hand if you want to weed out 10 million gauze seedlings, but judicial use of herbicides once or twice on the site, and we hope to be able to bring that up to really good kangaroo grassland area, the sort of place that you can walk to in springtime and see, you know, half a dozen flowering species at once any time over the given spring. You know, you might get 20 or 30 flowering species, and that's a few of the things that we're doing, which is research in new areas of vegetation, both getting the weeds out and planting, and reconstructing some of the habitat around the city that people wouldn't be used to seeing because it's not that common anymore.
Yeah, well, the Merri Creek and lots of the areas of the city, this has sort of been coming up a bit, I suppose, in our discussion this morning with Jeff about weed species. So many people are just unaware of what the original bush was like, and somehow think of it as being grey, dull and boring. But if you actually get out into really good original bush, it is anything else but. Like when we were at Port Campbell on the weekend, going down those cliff lines there where the cattle and stuff haven't got to, where the sheep haven't got to, the wildflowers are out was extraordinary. For the middle of winter, white correa blooming everywhere, mountain correa up on the cliff line, which is a really odd occurrence. Yeah, I've got some in the car. I'll give to you after the show. I meant to give to Jeff earlier today. And there's this little thyme plant, like a native thyme down there. I've got a bit of that for you too. There's a real classic, real beautiful blue flower, lots of sea rocket in flower. And just the colours of the sea, and just fantastic, you know. And what could you replace it with? If you look at the way people Europeanise the coast, they put a green bloody lawn on it and a couple of pissy date palms or something like that, and they go, oh, here we got a little coastal reserve, you know. But, you know, when it's the native bush, it just looks absolutely spot on, and there's such a big range of wildflowers you can plant, and such a great stack. I'm talking really well tonight, nothing like a bit of celebrating. But there's such a variety of native shrubs and flowers. We had someone on talkback, I think, earlier this morning that said they live in Carlton and what can they plant. Well, I live in Carlton now too, and I've found I can plant a range of about 320 shrubs or something on the lists I've seen. So we can get into quite an incredible variety of plants and quite an incredible variety of flowering times. So it's just a matter of reviewing your appreciation of what was originally there. And of course, it's not just the plants, it's all the insects that come. And as Jeff said this morning, there's some 300 insects live on black wattles, which is an incredible number of insects, and often they're beetles and things that are absolutely beautiful, really make a change to your day to go out and see a big orb weaver spider, for instance, with a big web out on you in the back of your place there across a gum tree or something. That just looks unreal. And then all the birds come in, of course, because you put in the trees, and all the things come into the leaf litter, and your little tree frogs and that have got a place to hide under the bark, and you get them croaking at night. And lots of people have done it, even in Melbourne, and just replaced their block and turned it back into native land, and particularly around the East Coast, Sandringham and Brighton, and there's some fantastic examples of it. One woman, Barbara Slater, who we must get on air one day. She's a pioneer of conservation. She's been going for many years. And she has a bird list from Sandringham of 120 species. Now, there are small national parks in the state that don't have as many birds visited as that, and this is just from her garden. So there's lots of things you can do, and there's a real appreciation. It's really good and positive to see. We have a positive note on after the St Kilda victory. It's really good to see good things happening.
Yeah, just quickly, if anyone in the inner city area, north and western suburbs, inner city, around the inner Yarra is interested in the local native plants and obtaining some of those, they can ring 419... hang on, I got it wrong. I'm about to say the RRR number, 387-4403 during the day. And if you don't get an answer, just try again. That's 387-4403.
For Vic Indige Nurseries?
Yeah, Vic Indige Nurseries. And we've got probably about 100 species, ranging from anything from some of the smallest plants to some of the tallest plants. And we haven't even scratched the surface yet.
And it's well worth a visit out there too, because it blows me out to go to the nursery and just to see all of the grass, like the grasses. People just don't appreciate some of the spear grasses and that, and the wallaby grasses. They look absolutely beautiful. Their colour and their shape is very subtle. And the seed pods on some of there's a golden spear grass down in Gippsland that just grows on little traffic islands and places. And the colours of the golden strands on the pods and that just look unreal. And it's just a subtlety there that isn't with the giant rhododendrons and that. That's not to knock those plants, but they look a lot better in the Himalayas where they're from, and or the New Guinea Highlands or something. But yeah, a lot of the native species are there to be discovered, and just to go to the nursery for a walk around. It's down at Ceres. What's the street? How do you get to Ceres?
Yeah, 8 Lee Street in West Brunswick on the Merri Creek. Bring some stout shoes. We haven't quite cleared the mud up yet, but we will have it done. We'll have done it by springtime.
Yeah, when it stops raining.
By geez, there was a lot of water going down the creeks last week. Well, the track from the Warumpi band there, a very natural sounding track called The Animal Song.
Not a bad track at all. And we'll just pick up on talking to Merri Cripps.
Radio for Cool Cats, 3 triple.
You there, Murray? Murray, you've been a fisherman in Port Franklin for a long time, and the problem that we're talking about tonight is flounder spearing, but flounder fishing has been part of fishing in Corner Inlet for many years. How long have people been fishing for flounder for?
It'll have to be well over 100 years, Bob.
Over 100 years. And what's flounder fishing spoken of separately? What's the specialised technique in flounder fishing?
It's a separate type of net that's set. It's a set net, bigger in the mash and sort of works solely by itself.
Right. And how's the net? The net's set out along a bank, and the flounder are caught on the tide. Would you like to explain how that works?
Yeah, as a rule, the flounder net is set at high water, and with a large rise and fall down here. As the tides fall, the flounders come off the bank and are tangled up in the net. And it's also worked in the reverse. It's shot shallow, and fish are caught on the ingoing tide as well.
Oh, right. Okay, now, flounder fishing, there's a long history of it, as you said, 100 years in the inlet. Did other places used to be fished for flounder like this before?
Yeah, as far as I know, there used to be flounder fisheries in Port Phillip and Western Port, and Anson's Inlet especially used to be a good fishery years ago.
Right, and what's happened to those fisheries?
Sorry, Bob.
What's happened to those fisheries now?
Well, they have been non-existent for a lot of years. Actually, they all been non-existent since the advent of flounder spearing.
Right. Now, the introduction of flounder spearing into Nooramunga, which is a section of Corner Inlet, it came as a bit of a surprise to the fishermen down there?
It certainly did, because flounder spearing had never been allowed in the western part of the inlet at any stage.
Right, and I think it was in the... When was the last time there was a meeting? I think it was in 1946, wasn't there, or something like that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty right.
Right, and at that stage it was rejected. Now, flounder spearing affects the flounder. We just know from circumstantial evidence that everywhere there has been spearing, there's no professional flounder industry. Didn't some of your family work in the mouth of the Tamar River, was it, at Launceston?
Yes, there was, well, I don't know how many years ago, but there was cripses that went and fished in the Tamar, especially for flounder, yes.
And there's no longer a professional industry there either?
There's no flounders in the Tamar at all, I believe.
Right. Now, how did you hear about the introduction of flounder spearing?
When we picked up the brochure from the CFNL.
Right, so there was no prior consultation to it?
No consultation at all. Oh, there might have been a hint about 3 or 4 years before that something was going to be done with the banning of the amateur net.
Right, what was the amateur net? Could you explain what amateur netting was at the same time as professional netting?
The amateur net was 50 yards long with a inch and 8 centre, which is, Gardy size, very small match in the middle.
Right, and so amateurs could get buy a permit to go netting up until 3 years ago?
That's right, yeah.
Right, now, was there... Obviously, the amateur netting must have been at least partly compatible with the professional netting at that time.
The amateur netting was, the likes of cobblers and porky fish and that type of thing. It was never done in a big way like flounder spearing is. You had to get the net and took 2 people to work it and all that sort of thing. And with the cobblers and that sort of thing, it was never used in this inlet very much at all.
Right, so the amount of effort required to go out and use a net and the amount of knowledge required to use it properly sort of made it inefficient enough so it didn't really affect the flounder fishery so much.
That's right, yes. There's very little amateur netting was ever done in this inlet, it was very, very small.
Right. Now, at the present time, the fishermen, we proposed a study, and the fishermen supported that proposed flounder study?
Yes, that's right.
And at the moment we've been knocked back on that. What's been the effect of flounder spearing so far? What's been the professional catches of flounder over the last, well, it's nearly a year now since it's been open?
Well, I can only speak from the western part of the inlet. I do know what happens in the eastern part to a certain degree, but the western part of the inlet, the flounders have been virtually non-existent. At the present time, there's 1 boat with flounder nets in the port here, and he works about, he's a chap 70-year-old and works about once a month.
Right. Now, what was the previous type of catches that you could expect in a good flounder season?
Oh, it was quite common for a boat to get between 8 and 10 boxes, which is that's about 10 dozen to a box, which is between 80 and 100 dozen, was quite common.
Right. Now, what about at Port Albert? There's a more significant flounder fishery at Port Albert, a more consistent flounder fishery down there. What's been the effect of opening up the eastern side where they professionally fish flounder to flounder spearing?
Well, last time I was at Port Albert, there wasn't 1 boat with flounder nets in down there either.
Right. Now, one of the problems with the flounder spearing is when they opened it up to flounder spearing, they quoted fish returns that showed that there was less effort being made in spearing, in professional fishing of flounder. They said in their report that the catch of flounder had gone down and the number of people fishing for flounder have gone down. How was that a misinterpretation of the data?
That was a misinterpretation on the with professional catch. You've got to look at a viable catch to make it pay, and if you can't get 1 or 2 boxes a night or a day or whatever the case may be, well, it just doesn't pay you to go out and chase the fish.
Right, so in other words, there were lots of fishermen there prepared to go and fish for flounder, but if the fish weren't there, you simply wouldn't go out.
That's right, yeah.
So when they read it as being less fishermen, less effort, in actual fact the effort's exactly the same, it's just less fish.
That's right, yeah.
What do you think? There has been a decline in flounder catches, though it's hard to say. The catch tends to go up and down a fair bit. What do you think the reasons for that decline are?
It's hard to say without a decent study on it or anything like that. Since 79, 80, the overall flounder catch has shown a decline, like even without the poor year like we've had since the introduction to flounder spearing.
Right, so any reasons you can offer for that decline before the opening of flounder spearing?
No, I can't really know. Well, we did have a lot of seagrass at one stage. Flounder don't like a lot of seagrass. They like the bare, sandier, muddier areas, and for 3 or 4 years there was seagrass everywhere. But this year, a lot of the seagrass, like the seagrass is not there all the time, the stuff that comes and goes, a lot of it has gone again, and there's still no flounders.
What can you tell us, Murray, about the life cycle of flounder? Like, when do they come into the inlet? What are the kind of peak times that you're most likely to catch them when the populations are healthy?
Most times with flounder, as your spring, like early spring, middle spring. I have seen them stick over the summer too, but usually spring and autumn are the main times.
Right, and when do the females come in with roe, with the eggs? When you're likely to catch flounder with eggs?
That's usually right in the middle of winter. Would be just about finished now. They usually start about April and go through to end of June, end of July.
Right, okay. And young flounder, when do you start seeing lots of little young flounder up on the mudflats and among the mangroves?
Well, usually with small flounder, you find them nearly all the time, if there's flounder around.
Right. So, what's the situation now as far as the fishermen are concerned? Have you heard anything positive from Conservation Forests and Lands in regard to flounder spearing?
We haven't heard a thing from them for 8 or 10 months, I suppose.
Right, yeah, well, that's something that we're trying to address now. And what do you think the result will be if they continue to keep flounder spearing open?
I just don't like the idea of the whole thing. Like, I think we'll finish up like Western Port and Port Phillip and the Tamar.
No flounder for anyone?
Flounder at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an... kind of action do you think that this is part of an overall move? What do you think is the motivation? Is it the favouring of amateur fishermen above professionals? Is that the kind of impression you get from Conservation Forests and Lands?
I certainly do, Bob, on that aspect, yeah.
Is that applying to much more than just flounder? Is that right across the board?
Oh, that'd be hard to say. They sort of work on the double aspect that if a fish or a species is there, that the amateurs should have as much right to catch as what professional does.
Right, and do you think that this has affected them towards opening it up?
I think so, yeah.
Now, how many years have you been fishing flounder for, Murray?
Be pretty close to 30 years.
There's lots of fishermen down there with similar lengths of time experience. At any time, was anyone consulted before the opening of flounder spearing at all?
No, just that hint, as I said, about 4 or 5 years ago, they said they were going to they might introduce spearing when they took away the net.
Right.
Since then, there's been nothing until it come out in the brochure.
Right. Okay, mate. Well, look, thanks for your time. We're going to interview Ken King, so we might leave you on hold so you can hear that interview too.
Yep, all right.
Okay, mate. No worries at all. We'll leave you on hold.
Yeah, good.
Okay, Merri Creek, and that gives you a pretty good summation from the fisherman's point of view. And we'll go into a track and we'll pick up Ken King. But before we do that, I'll just give you a little bit of a rundown about the life history of flounder. There's one person, when we got onto the study initially, we had to try to track down what was known about flounder biologically. And in a quick ring around Marine Science Lab and at Queenscliff and hunting up various marine biologists, we tracked down a woman by the name of Christine Crawford in Tasmania. She'd studied flounder. She sent us up a thesis, and we worked out from that and from talking to her that what happens with the flounder life cycle is that they Flounder, as you know, are flat, and both eyes are on top, but they don't start like that, and it appears that the female flounder go out of the bays and inlets and lay their eggs out in quite deep water. The eggs float to the surface and they hatch and they float to the surface, and the young flounder, the planktonic flounder, come in on the tides and end up among the various bits and pieces of mangroves and on sandy beaches and on muddy beaches, where after about a month they metamorphose, turn into a flat fish and go onto the bottom. When we started looking at Corner Inlet in detail, we found out, and we were looking for ways in which flounder spearing could affect the fish both directly and indirectly. The most obvious problem in the direct affecting of the fish was that the spearing would take perhaps too many flounder. Perhaps it's too easy to spear flounder. So that's one thing that remains to be determined. And we had one example of two characters who got 19 dozen flounder in the space of 2 hours, which appeared to be a lot more efficient than the professionals who have to spend all night to get an equivalent number of flounder if they're there. Now, this was a time when professionals were getting very, very few indeed in their nets. The other way that they could be disturbed is by people walking through the mangroves and walking through mudflat areas in which young flounder use as nursery areas. In this way, they could disturb the young flounder and perhaps in that disturbance lift them off the bottom and make them more likely to be preyed upon by things even like crabs, because the flounder are very small, and when you first see them, they're sometimes less than 10 millimetres long. So there's a whole lot of ways that it could be studied, and what we proposed was indeed to study a comparison. Firstly, we wanted the first proposal that we put to Conservation Forests and Lands down at Yarram region with the support of fishermen from Murray and from all the fishermen at both Port Franklin and Port Albert. Was the first study was to close the inlet to spearing and do a comparative study between the area that had been open to spearing, Nurramunga, and the area that had been closed to spearing, Corner Inlet. Now, the idea of the comparative study was to catch flounder from both the same areas at the same time of day or night, on the same tides with the same nets, both catch them with nets and spear them, and see how efficient spearing was compared to netting, and also look at the population structure to see if there was any difference. That study was rejected. It was felt that by Conservation Forests and Lands at that time that there wasn't a good enough reason, there wasn't good enough evidence to close off the flounder fishery, remembering that the prejudice that Murray mentioned, that when people want to open up stuff for amateurs against professionals. So then we proposed a different study, and it was just straight out comparison. It was a comparison between the catch per unit effort, which is the kind of statistics that fisheries really like, and that's the amount of effort that you put in to get your flounder, the amount of time exactly you put in, and the number of flounder you catch. And this is a strict measure between someone spearing on land and someone netting at sea, taking times when they go out, noting where the nets are set, keeping a track of exactly what's net used so it's completely compatible, the results, and keeping the same person spearing using the same spearing gear and the same spotlights. This study was put up with great optimism and eventually went to VERFAC, which is the Victorian Amateur Fishermen's Council, I think, and VERFAC gave it a very provisional approval, subject to the approval of Conservation Forests and Lands, particularly the local region. We presented that study to the local region some 3 months ago now. We waited for comment, and we got very little comment. Finally, we got something back from them. They said to us on the phone that yes, we could do the study, but no, they wouldn't support it. They didn't like the idea of us approaching FIRTA, which is the Federal Fishing Industries Research Trust account, because it would compete with Fisheries and Wildlife for funding. They weren't going to give the study any more priority than any other university-based study in the inlet. And they certainly weren't going to sit on a joint committee of both fishermen, naturalists and researchers with Conservation Forests and Lands to oversee the study and oversee management to be implemented upon its result. As you can imagine, it's a pretty frustrating position to be in. It hasn't been what you call an issue. There hasn't been people running up and down and demonstrating, and it's something that you would have thought sensible research would be supported for. So to get some more answers, we're going to come back after this track and talk to Ken King of Conservation Forests and Lands in Yarram and find out what attitude they have towards flounder spearing.
Okay, listen, what you've got to do is like subscribe to RRR, right? Because it's a radio station, and you've got to stop being breadheads and like subscribe, because like that's what they told me to say. Okay?
Finished some time ago.
Yes, I tell you what, that was what you commonly known as a horrific track, Rog. Good to see we're all back online with normal parrot-type activities.
They were the seeds, I guess, but not the bad seeds, but not good seeds either.
No. What was the band? So I can
The
avoid
Seeds.
buying the record, The Seeds. Right, I'll avoid that one. Okay, but back on the track with flounder spearing, and for those of you perhaps who haven't heard, we've been talking to Merri Creek, a professional fisherman, about flounder spearing. We've been through a bit about their life cycles, and now we're going to talk to Ken King from Conservation Forests and Lands to try to find out why flounder spearing was originally opened in Corner Inlet. Are you there, Ken?
Yes, Bob.
Look, Ken, you're the Assistant Regional Manager for Resource Conservation in Yarram Conservation Forests and Lands, that regional body. Why was it that flounder spearing was initially opened in Corner Inlet, Nurramunga area?
The flounder spearing was opened in response to the submissions that the department received when we were looking at the marine and coastal parks down here. Up until recent times, it was allowed amateur netting for flounder in the inlet, and a lot of the recreational fishermen felt that they still wanted access to the flounder resource, and therefore they put in a fair bit of time and effort into their submissions during the planning for the marine and coastal parks.
As we understood it, the submission really consisted of a petition, didn't it, with some 140 signatures that were taken on a whip around in both the Latrobe Valley and Yarram. There wasn't a more detailed biological submission, was there?
There wasn't a detailed biological submission, but the submission was more than just the list of names. There was quite a number of personal representations to regional staff and also to head office staff by the recreational fishermen.
Aren't you concerned that with flounder spearing, with Corner Inlet being the best flounder resource we've got in Victoria, supporting the largest professional floundering industry, having been closed for over 120 years to spearing, that the opening up to spearing would deplete that resource?
Well, we've had that concern put to us, and what we've done in response to that is we're looking at establishing a monitoring program which will allow us to identify any adverse trends if they do occur.
What's the exact nature of your monitoring program? Because when we spoke to your fisheries officers some 3 months ago now, only one of them had been out flounder spearing one night himself at that stage. So how are you monitoring this problem?
We're monitoring it by going out on nights where we're likely to encounter flounder spearing, and our staff are actually interviewing the flounder spearers out there, and as well as that we're also doing general surveys of amateur fishing by surveying people at the boat ramp.
Right, but in regard to keeping it to flounder spearing, you're not going to get good biological information by interviewing people spearing, surely?
Well, we believe that we'll be able to identify the effort that will be put in by the amateur fishermen, and also be able to identify any adverse effects that could come out by using this particular method of fishing.
All right, well, first we'll deal with the effort. How can you, by randomly interviewing people, work out the total effort involved in flounder spearing? If there's people who have entry from some 20 points to Nurramunga, let alone entry to a whole lot of island areas by boat, how is it possible by random interviews to work out what the effort is?
Well, we wouldn't be able to get a quantitative figure that could be identified from year to year, but what we're out to achieve is a trend over the long term, because as well as that we'll be matching it to any of the studies that are done on the actual flounder species, which the numbers vary considerably from one year to the other.
Now, there's only one study been done so far to date in Australia on flounder, on greenback flounder, by Christine Crawford, and none of that related to numbers or population pressure, and she said in her report that what was badly needed was a study of the effects of flounder spearing on flounder, because everywhere that's been open to flounder spearing, the resources become so depleted that not only is it not viable for professional fishing, but it's not viable for amateurs. Wouldn't it be fair comment that this depletion of the resource is what's led to the pressure on Corner Inlet in the first place?
No, I don't think you could conclude that at all. You know, we're concerned about the management of all the marine environment down there, and we have reason to believe that at some stage the restrictions on some of the species there might be related more to their habitat than the actual exploitation pressure that they're being put under. And what we're endeavouring to do in establishing the management of the marine reserves is to set up a monitoring program under which we'll be able to establish the trends in exploitation and species,
and we'll get a picture over a number of years.
But surely that is a pretty careless approach, really, because what we've had happen in areas immediately adjacent to the marine park, such as McLaughlin's Beach and Anderson's Inlet, within a very short period of time, the professional and then the amateur industry collapsed in those areas without any significant change to the breeding areas of the flounder. In fact, it's Corner Inlet that suffered the most major catastrophic changes to its environment of breeding for flounder. So surely in that you're taking a big risk with the flounder populations and a professional floundering industry.
Oh, we don't. We believe we're taking a big risk. In fact, we believe that from some of the interviews we've had with our regional staff with some of the commercial fishermen around us, that they've had an extremely good year for flounder this year as well.
Well, look, just to hold on that point, we'll bring Murray back on and find out what he's got to say about that. Murray, what do you think about that comment from Ken that there's been a good year for professional fishing?
I don't think he wanted to talk to anybody that's tried to catch flounder, because they've been virtually non-existent from Christmas right through.
Right, and is that in both ports, Port Franklin and Port Albert?
I believe they had a little patch up at Port Albert for about 3 weeks until the weather got warm enough in the holiday season. It's been the same up there too.
Okay, thanks, Murray. We'll talk back to Ken. Okay, Ken, well, it appears that the professionals, and Murray's well in contact with all the professionals, are saying, no, it's been a really lousy year for flounder, and the catches have been down even on previous years. So it would appear that it has, you can't say it's exactly had an effect on spearing, but it appears that the information you've had from professionals has been wrong.
Well, my information relates purely to in the area where flounder spearing is permitted, and that's principally in the area where the Port Albert fishermen would be fishing.
Well, as Murray said, they've just had a 3-week flush of flounder. It's nothing compared to previous year's season, so you can hardly say it was a healthy catch, could you?
Well, you'd have to look at the variability over the years. You know, you can't look at one year and then look at the next and say it's going to be as bad or as worse. You really.
I agree with that, but then you can't come out and make a statement like you've just made that it's been a good year for fishing, when in fact the catch has been very poor compared to any year, hasn't it?
Well, we'll check that up, but I'm just going on a comment that the regional staff have reported back to me after discussions.
Okay, well look, one of the things that was proposed earlier in this piece that you're aware of was a flounder study. Now that study was proposed with a report on flounder, and then a study was proposed. The first study was rejected by Conservation Forests and Lands because it called for the cessation of flounder before the study commenced. The second study was a catch per unit effort measure between professional fishermen and amateurs. Now that study was vetted by people in your own department. It was set up on guidelines used by Fisheries and Wildlife, and the fishermen were prepared to put in their time voluntarily for it. Why did you reject it when this study would truly and scientifically prove once and for all whether or not the spearing of flounder was the thing that was going to affect their population? Why did you reject it?
You mean the second study?
Yep.
I'm not aware that has been rejected.
Well, we had a letter from Conservation Forests and Lands in Yarram, and their method of rejection, I suppose, was a bit roundabout, but they said that the funding for that study from the federal industry, the fishing industry research grants from FERTA, the trust account, would be competitive with fisheries research. It also said in that letter that the study would be given no more weight than any other university study to carry out. We rang and we asked for cooperation of Conservation Forests and Lands to join a joint committee with the fishermen and the researchers so they could oversee the study, oversee its setting up and its guidelines and any management implications from its result. And there was no comment whatsoever in the letter about that, and we assumed from the no comment and from the reaction we had from Ian Hemphill of your department that it was a complete rejection of the study, and it'd be no more than just a normal university study which would have to have a funding resource other than FERTA. Now, if you haven't heard of it, do you think there's a possibility that that study could indeed be instituted?
I've heard of it, and my interpretation and position on that particular study is that our regional staff and our head office staff of the Fisheries Division are still discussing the report which you put in, and I'm not aware there's been any decision made to reject it or accept it.
Well, we got a letter that clearly said that the fisheries were opposed to it because we're opposed to its funding from FERTA because it was competitive with fisheries, and on the other hand, not only that, but they had their own priority program for research of which this was not part. Now, that was clearly stated in the letter. So is there going to be a change of attitude from Conservation Forests and Lands?
From the Yarram region or from the Fisheries Division?
It was from the Yarram region. It was signed by Ian Hemphill.
Well, as I said, my position is still the same as is what I said before. We've even been given a contact name for the person to discuss the matter within the Fisheries Division.
That was Jeff Byrne.
No,
Who was it?
Ross Winstanley.
Right. Well, Ross Winstanley was contacted by phone by myself, and I spoke to him, and he was part of the VERFAC group, the amateurs I met, that gave it, admittedly, a provisional approval, but that approval was resting on the cooperation of Yarram Conservation Forest and Lands. Can we expect to get the cooperation now from Yarram Conservation and Forest and Lands for that study?
As I said, my position is that we're still discussing it with the Fisheries Division. We'll take their advice as to whether it's the type of study which is going to give us the monitoring that we require.
Well, it's set up on exactly the same framework as your previous study. In fact, ex-fisheries officers helped establish it, and it's been vetted within Marine Science Lab, so it would appear to conform exactly. What is the nature of the discussion required further? Why does it take 4 months to get any different result than a letter that would appear to be extremely off-putting?
Well, as I said, we're still going to discuss it.
Right.
What we've got to discuss is what input will be required by the region, what input will be required by the commercial fishermen, how many years we're going to have to conduct it.
1 year.
You believe 1 year is enough to get...
Well, that was the advice we got from your department in establishing the study. They thought that the 12-month comparison between the catch... It's a comparison of catch per unit effort, and the usual length of the study was 12 months.
Well, the catch per unit effort, as you're aware, is very simple to do some interpretive work on because on the commercial side, because there's a tremendous amount of information.
Well, not in regard to specialised flounder fishing. There's no information from Corner Inlet on catch per unit effort. That was one of the problems. Not direct catch per unit effort that's comparable to spearing, was there?
No, but there's enough data on the commercial side to do some interpretation.
Well, that data was misinterpreted, firstly, to open up spearing in the first place, because the data showed a declining catch, and it would appear to be quite irresponsible in an area that's declared a marine park to open it up to further fishing pressure when the catch has been shown to decline while the effort has remained constant.
I don't think I think there'd be some scientists in our division who would have a different view to that.
Well, all right, I'll give you the figures, and you don't have to be a scientist. You can use common sense. The catch has depleted by 1/3 in the last 20 years. The number of fishermen fishing for flounder hasn't changed in 20 years, and you've opened up a further pressure by flounder spearing. So surely that speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Well, I can't comment on the accuracy of your figures that you've used because I wasn't directly involved in the...
Well, they're your figures. There's the stuff you sent out to us. It was the fish return form that went with Terry Walker's stuff that was sent to us.
Terry Walker is the right man to comment on those because he would have been directly involved.
Right.
There are, as I said, it was all part of submissions that were received as part of the establishment of the marine and coastal parks. And there was also, a few years before that, there was more pressure on the resource too because there was amateur netting.
Right, but a different kind of pressure, and as Merri Creek has explained to us, and you haven't had the time to hear that, the amateur netting required a hell of a lot more effort and preparation than what spearing does. And so that was why we wanted to compare the effort of spearing to flounder fishing. But on a positive note, and we've got to get a positive note out of this, Ken, do you think you will look at it a bit more seriously now? Do you think there's a good chance that you will support this study on the regional basis to get it off the ground?
I'll be talking to Ross Winstanley as soon as I can to try and set up a meeting to further it.
Right, and would you be prepared to sit on a joint committee with the fishermen and with the researchers to oversee that study?
If it was to go ahead, we'd like to be involved. The region certainly.
Could you think of a reason for it not to go ahead?
I can't comment offhand because I'd like to talk to the Fisheries Division.
All right, mate. Okay, well, look, you've had a hard enough time on air. Thanks a lot for coming on, and we hope to hell that we can get something happening out of this.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Okay. Murray, what do you reckon about that?
Very amusing. Listen, Bob.
You reckon we'll get something?
Hope so.
All right, mate.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your time, and we've just about run out of time, and we'll get back to you soon.
Right, thanks for being...
Okay. Thanks, mate.
Good, bye.
Bye. All right. Well,
As is so often the case, it seems, with conservation forest and lands, that usually inadequate information leads them to making perhaps a decision that may not have been the wisest one, and often, I find in most cases, the mistake is compounded instead of sort of taking a step back, looking at the view which takes the most common sense and doing something about it.
Well, look, they're all reasonable blokes, but there seems to be an inordinate amount of pressure from the amateur fishing lobby to open up these areas, and it just doesn't seem to rate anything in regard to common sense. And I don't know what the end result will be, but I don't think there's anything more reasonable than proposing a study, and I don't, to come up with an independent result. God, common sense would dictate to pull bloody flounder spearing out straight away, like anyone who had that job would say, cool, you can't everywhere flounder spearing's been, you've wiped out the flounder resource, so it's not compatible, and in a marine park. It's extraordinary. So we'll stay right hard on their hammer on this one, because and the fishermen too, look, to their credit, how often is it the fishermen get involved in proposing a study? You can't get much better than that. And they really should be involved, and hopefully even out of tonight's discussion we could have another bite for the parrot. Anyway, it's getting about time for us to go. Scripts of the Airways coming up soon, and remember, those tropical island trips, that will be your trip of a lifetime. If you've got any doubts whatsoever, it will be absolutely mint. It's the place where people evolved. Your body will be at the same temperature as the sea and the sky and the air around you. You will see more natural history and more. We've got some 7,000 species of marine things around those islands. There's God knows how many seabirds, turtles, the whole lot. What could be better than 8 days out there? So get it together and give us a ring, and we'll send you out a brochure. El prompto postus hastus by Thursday. But it'll be well worthwhile. So you can give us a call on 419-2066. And remembering, if you're interested and what we're doing on the parrot, you reckon it's a good show, there's only no better way of showing your appreciation than subscribe. If you're not already a subscriber to 3RRR, and you can post it in and write Eclectic Parrot in the top corner and give us a couple of social credit points.
Or if you're a regional listener, subscribe to the station which relays the program.
That's right, and actually if you're in 3MFM at the moment, I think they have got a subscriber drive. So to our Gippsland listeners, get out there and subscribe to 3MFM, because it could be a good thing for Gippsland. It's going real well. And good day to all the Gippslanders, good day to the Apollo Bayites and all the other crew who we know tune into the Parrot, our Maldonites who rang us up so heartily today, and our Mildurites, our most distant listeners. But we're getting towards the end of the dime. I can hear a baby elephant walking somewhere. I certainly can. And Roger, good to have you back, son.
Yes, and we'll be back again next week with more news and views on the environment.
Yes, and interview with Cole Olympus about green turtles next week, which should be really fascinating. That'll be in the evening show. So, goodbye from Bob McDonald.
And goodbye from Roger Jones, and we'll be back again.
Yeah, and plague us with calls about those trips. Want to hear more about it, and another Paul Campbell one too. So you can give us a call about the whole